Hello and welcome to the Total Saints podcast. We are the weekly Saints podcast, your home for all things Southampton Football Club. We're recording this podcast live from Steam Town Brewery in Eastleigh, and we've got the pleasure of being joined tonight by a live audience. Thank you for joining us. Thank you as well to Simon from Hampshire Event DJs for supplying all the equipment tonight, and also James Evans Visuals who are filming this episode. If you want to find out more about the work that they do, we'll have all the links in the podcast show notes and the YouTube description. And of course, our podcast is supported by our loyal Patreon community, many of whom are with us tonight. I know we say it every week. We really do mean it as well. This podcast wouldn't exist without your support, so thank you as always. Coming up on our special podcast, going to look back at our first season under new manager Russell Martin. Ahead of the playoffs, we pick our highs and lows from the last 46 games. And we're amongst friends, so we can dare to dream and ask, what if? And I'll put some of your questions to our panel of guests as well. My name is Martin Starke, and joining me in the pub this evening are Glen de la Cour, who is writer of the blog League 1-10.
Thank you very much.
Steve Grant is owner of Saints Web. And Alfie House is senior Southampton reporter for the Daily Echo.
That's the biggest one. Come on. Thank you.
He's got his family in. Underpinned by our TSP patrons and live from the Steam Town Brewery in Eastleigh, this is episode 278 of the Total Saints podcast. So Russell Martin was appointed Saints' new manager 11 months ago. It took a while to get the paperwork sorted, but he eventually joined us from Swansea last June. Mixed emotions, largely for me, he's the first full-time manager who's younger than I am, which took a while to get used to. I'm just wondering, guys, with the regular season now finished, I think it's probably a good time to talk about how he's done. If I start with you, Glenn, looking back at Russell Martin's first full season, what are your thoughts?
Overall, I think you have to remember where we were, and where we were was flat last in the Premier League, getting relegated quite spectacularly. We were certainly a hell of a lot worse than the likes of Leeds and Leicester, who came down with us. So Russell Martin walked into that. He walked into a bloated squad, many of whom wanted to leave. For varying different reasons, some of whom we wanted to leave because they just weren't good enough, and he had to deal with all that. And he came in. It took a bit longer than it should have done to get him in. It's still going on, the compensation row with Swansea, of course. So it took a while to get him in, and then and we brought him in because Jason Wilcox wanted us to play this certain style of football that was more or less in keeping with what he'd come up with at Manchester City, and Russell Martin fitted that bill, and he came in and had to impose this style of play on us, and we didn't know and probably he didn't know the players we had were going to be good enough to do it. And there's been a few sort of glitches along the way, but in the main, bearing in mind our pretty terrible record at recruiting managers, really since Ronald Koeman, I would say only Ralph Hasenhüttl, or for the first sort of 2-3 years, has been a decent appointment. If you think of the others that we've had since then, Claude Poole, mixed bag, Pellegrino, useless, Hughes, useless, Nathan Jones, useless, Ruben Sellers, useless. So, I think he's done pretty well. He's made it enjoyable. Most of the games have been enjoyable. There's been a few mistakes along the way, which you've got to remember. He is a young manager, as you alluded to, who's never really, he's never managed a club with the expectations of Southampton. We're the biggest club he's ever managed, so he's managing at a different level to what he's done before. So he's got to be given, some sort of license to learn on the job. There's been a few games where I thought he's blown it. Hull at home, I thought he got that one horribly wrong. Until the Leeds game, he'd not really found a way to. Forget the Leeds game. Until the West Brom game, he'd not really found a way to deal without having Flynn Downs playing. So I think that they're the sort of black marks against him, sort of thing. But in the main, I think it's been very good. We've won 20 odd games, which has been very enjoyable. And I hope he's here next year, regardless of what division we ultimately find ourselves in. Yeah. I like the fact that he's found a sort of, the way we won the game against Leeds last week showed a bit of pragmatism. It wasn't just my way or no way. We have to play all this passing football and it's 4-3-3 and that's it. I thought the fact we went with a different formation, the fact we played really well, shows that he knows there is more than one way to win a game. So overall, I think it's been encouraging, and like I say, I hope he's here next year, no matter what happens in the playoffs.
We've had a few questions about that actually. Steve, we kind of knew what sort of manager we were getting. We knew what the style of play was going to be. How's it worked out for you? Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I don't think fans can kind of not enjoy a season where you've won more than 20 games. Yeah. You've got to
scored the goals as well.
Well, yeah, and up until a week and a half before the end of the season, we were the top scorers in the league, and yeah, so there's obviously an implied sense of entertainment there. Defensively, we've obviously shipped plenty of goals, so there's been plenty of entertainment for everybody else at the same time. But yeah, I think. Ultimately, I think a lot of fans would rather us win a game 3-2 in the last minute than grind it out 1-0. And certainly the way that we were grinding out 1-0 defeats last season kind of illustrates that. I think Saints fans as a general are quite sort of willing to kind of forgive sort of growing pains, if you like, as long as they see a plan. And at the end of the day, if you're being entertained, then you can kind of see the progression of how this team has kind of evolved over the season. Obviously, once we got to the end of September, everything was an absolute disaster, an absolute train wreck. But from that point onwards, that Leeds game, they kind of righted everything that had been going wrong in the previous month. And other than a couple of sort of minor hiccups on the way, we haven't really looked back. And ultimately, it's going to be only like a month or two here or there where we're missing key players, and ultimately we didn't quite have the depth that either Leeds or Leicester have had, or the luck with injuries that. Ipswich, absolutely fair play to them for finishing second. They've absolutely deserved it, but they have not missed any of their key players for long periods of the season. And that is so important, especially when you've got 4 teams that are going at it hammer and tongs, and you've got two automatic places and 1 playoff spot. For them to have kind of kept pace all season is absolutely extraordinary. But we've not been far behind, even with all the upheaval at the start of the season, which I think, the predictions, I think, at the start of the season among the fan base, I think if you took a straw poll, there would be so many wide variants of what everyone was expecting. Some people would have expected us to win the league because, of course, some people expect us to win the league. There would have been people that have said, well, as long as we don't get relegated, that's fine. We can build for next season. And obviously everything kind of in between. I think 4th is kind of a fair reflection. And ultimately it's now going to come down to a 3-game season where, okay, can we kind of do it in the big games, which has been kind of the big question, I think, for this team over the course of a number of years. Really, I don't think this is exclusive to this set of players even. But can we go home and away against a side? I mean, in all honesty, and especially in that away game at the Hawthorns, we worked out how to play against them. We had a system that worked superbly well, and the key is now whether we've got a system that's going to work in a game of magnitude, sort of several times bigger than that game. And I actually don't think the same system will work, because West Brom will have worked out what was going on and will change their ways. And that's where the manager is going to earn his corn in terms of the system. Ultimately, it's got to be a system to win a specific game now. There shouldn't be a future plan of, well, this is what we want to do in the future, so this is how we're going to try out now for these 3 games. You don't get that luxury. It's winning in, losing your season's over. So we've got to get past West Brom, get to Wembley, nail it in that game. It's even 2 of those games, nail 2 of those games, and 1 is kind of on par, and you're up again. Yeah. And everyone then come the summer is saying, well, what was everyone worried about?
Yeah, well, the man's a genius. Alfie, yours is a slightly different relationship, I guess, to the rest of us. How have you found Russell Martin to deal with? How have you found the football and the atmosphere this year?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I mean, the first thing, the football is it's exciting, it's attacking. I think there's a bit of a myth around Russell Martin football that I did want to address very early. I think most people don't agree with it, but some people still think that it's some kind of passive or defensive style of play, and at times it looks like that because it takes 20 passes to break the opposition down. But they have more attacks than anyone else. They've scored more than most teams in the league. They spend much more time in the opposition half, creating things, making things happen, and they've obviously missed key players at times. But I think I like the football. I wasn't sold on the idea of just keeping the ball all the time, and they have had 65% possession, way more than anyone else. They keep the ball so much more than anyone else. And I wasn't sold on that at first, but I do like it. But to deal with him as a person, I mean, he's a real human being for sure. He's not a robot or a droid. You can see that if you have 3 games in a week, he's a totally different person by the end of it. The 3rd game, he will be, if it's gone wrong, he'll be really snappy. He'll try and mug you off a little bit in front of other people. He'll press you on your questions. But I think that's sometimes totally fair enough because they're under a lot of pressure. I remember one of the first times I ever spoke to him, I did a long interview with him in Turkey right at the start of the season where I met him properly and sat down, and that was great. And then we had the AZ Alkmaar game at home in a friendly. And I thought that the game just looked a little bit more pragmatic. I thought they were just trying to be a bit more defensive, maybe trying something else out. And I asked him, Russell, why did you set your team up in that way? Did you set your team up to be slightly more pragmatic? I'd never had this before from a manager, and straight away he turned around and said, well, why? Why do you think that? Why do you think that? And I wasn't prepared for that sort of level of questioning. I'm not an analyst. Exactly, I'm not an analyst, but you get used to that because he does that. If you pick him up on something that he doesn't agree with, he'll come straight back at you, and it makes for an interesting working relationship for sure.
I was going to ask, Glenn, you mentioned some of the mistakes that he's made. I mean, what are some of the errors that stand out for you? Obviously, like the Jack Stevens conundrum is one, maybe the subs as well. There's been a few things that we've not agreed on necessarily over the year.
I think there's been a question of balance a few times with regards to combinations of players, especially in midfield. The system and the way that we play kind of depends massively on the midfield being on it. And in the games, I mean, everyone's aware of the stat now of how we've done when Flynn Downs has not been playing. And when we've gone into, I remember one game, Ipswich at home, we went in with a midfield 3 of Smallbone, Aribo and Adam Armstrong. And this was before Aribo got himself fit. And he was kind of plucked from nowhere. He hadn't even, I think he'd been on the bench, but he hadn't been near the starting 11. And we played that Ipswich game with those 3 in midfield. It was a predictable disaster. And we lost that game. And the one that I remember as being the worst game of the season was Hull at home, when the midfield was Smallbone, Rothwell, Stuart Armstrong. So there wasn't anyone in there who had any defensive nous really whatsoever. So they were a couple of mistakes that I think he's made with team selections. Probably putting more trust in some players than they actually deserve. Thinking that they could do a job other than their normal job. And but I think that can be a strength as well, in that he has total belief in his players to do that. But I do think sometimes that was slightly misplaced. But you live and you learn, and that's what I was talking about earlier. With hopefully he's learned from that. But then, as Alfie said there, he might completely and utterly disagree with that assessment and think it's something that can work again in another game, and that's his prerogative, and it's just my opinion on it. But I just hope Flynn Downs stays fit for these 3 games, hopefully 3 games, and we don't have to answer that question or wonder about it. But I just so that was the main sort of mistake, and for me, and sometimes just maybe not being pragmatic enough. It is difficult. I mean, the only a really bad game, Millwall at home. Yeah, that was a terrible one to lose that, and that was just a general sort of flat performance. I mean, some of the games that we've lost, like Cardiff away, to me that's not down to the manager. That's down to the players sort of like sacking it off with half an hour to go, sort of thing. Ipswich away, You know, Russell Martin set the team up. We were brilliant for an hour, and then collapsed in the last half an hour. And yeah, some of the substitutions at times have been questionable. But yeah, I don't always think it's the manager's fault if something goes wrong. You know, sometimes you do have to look at the players and are they carrying out instructions? Are they doing the basic things? And no one really likes it if a manager throws the players under the bus. So the manager has to take it sometimes. And yeah, I don't always think it's certainly in Russell Martin's case. I don't always think this season it's been down to him. So.
I just wonder, Steve, we were all enjoying that unbeaten run, the 25 games. I wonder if that maybe masked some of the issues. There were some poor performances in that run, weren't there? But we were all on such a crest of a wave and perhaps a little bit obsessed with would it be 24, would it be 25? And did that hide some of the issues, you think?
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I think ultimately we have a squad that should be, the game's obviously not played on paper, but if it was, then you would put our squad probably third in this league, certainly at the start of the season, probably at the midway point as well. And I think there is kind of an inherent belief that in the Championship, if you're a team that comes down, you've probably got that stronger squad, and therefore you will match up favourably against most opponents you're going to come up against. And yeah, I mean, certainly there were times in that unbeaten run where you kind of think, well, we kind of got away with that, or we got slightly more than we deserved. There were obviously a lot of late winners, a couple of late equalisers as well, I think.
That one at Preston.
I mean that Preston game as an example, where second half we weren't on it at all, and that should have been comfortable home win in the end, really. But we dug it out, and I think that kind of shows a sort of inner steeliness that we've not really seen from a Saints team for a few years, really. So I think it showed us different things, but it also showed that you've got to be on it, sort of at all times in every game. It doesn't really matter who you play. You're not going to have an easy home win if you don't play well. We've had easy home wins, but in all of those we've played well. There's not been any sort of 3-0 wins where we've played terribly, but we've just scored all 3 shots we've had. You've had to work hard for those. Whereas when we've been off of it, those have been the games where the result has then kind of hung in the balance a little bit. But no, I think really you go through these periods. And the longer it goes on, you actually it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, really, in that the belief just increases every single time. And that was why I think the performance at Bristol City that ended it was such a surprise. Yeah. That I think in that clump of games, obviously we had so many games in February, and that clump of games where we had to play two games in the same midweek, which is ludicrous. Bristol on the Tuesday and then West Brom on the Friday. I think of those two, everyone would have probably said, well, West Brom is probably that game where this run comes to an end, because we're not going to be able to sustain all of this. It's just too much. If you're not going to, because you're probably going to have to change the team, rotate, especially in midfield, which, as Glen says, has been our kind of Achilles heel when the midfield has kind of been tinkered with a little bit, and we don't have Flynn Downs as a prime example, and sort of latterly Stuart Armstrong, where all of a sudden that midfield doesn't look as if it has either the defensive steeliness or the attacking kind of exuberance to sort of link the midfield with the attack. And as a result, when we've had those games clumped together, you kind of look at it and think, well, we're going to lose one of these eventually. And it was, as I say, it was a shock that it was the Bristol one rather than West Brom. Yeah. But in fairness, that also showed the sort of resolve to bounce back again. And again, something we've not seen from a Saints team for a while. Certainly not since sort of the sort of middle years under Ralph Hasenhüttl, where we'd have a little run of bad games, and then suddenly we'd show a bit of steeliness, and then we go on a positive run. So I think it's a bit of those sort of corporate nonsense things to say, but you kind of do have to sometimes take the positives from the setbacks. It's a bit grim. It's a bit sort of, I'm sitting in a conference room with some keynote speaker waxing lyrical, but it's But it is true. You do have to kind of put to the side some of the setbacks, and just have belief in what you're doing, and the manager clearly does. And I mean, from what we've seen, it seems to have rubbed off on the players for the most part.
Yeah. Big couple of weeks ahead. I want to do just highs and lows of the season, best moments, worst moments, best goals, that kind of thing. The regular season obviously came to an end with that win at Leeds. 46 games played, 26 wins, 87 goals scored, 63 conceded. I think it's fair to say it's been quite an entertaining season. Alfie, 46 games, you must have been at, what, 45 of them?
Yeah, 45.
At least?
Yeah, I guess the one I missed.
Middlesbrough away?
Huddersfield. I missed the 5-3 at home, unfortunately. So there you go.
What of your highlights, your best moments of the year, if you were trying to sum it up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's been obviously so many good moments. I think in terms of what it meant for the club and what it meant for the manager and to an extent the players as well, I do think that Leeds in September, to go 4 games, losing all of them, and then produce that kind of performance, Adam Armstrong taking his chances, I think that brought a lot of belief back to the supporters especially, but I do also think that the club as well. I spoke to Phil Parsons actually a couple of days before that game, and he did reassure me unreservedly that they weren't going to make any sudden movements with the manager or anything like that, but he did say things do have to improve. Obviously they've lost 4 in a row, and that was the catalyst for much better things, wasn't it? Was that the start of the unbeaten run? So that was a huge moment, I think, in front of the home fans against one of the sides who we thought would be up there. So yeah, I would say that one. I also think just keeping the players in transfer deadline day as well, and some of the players they've kept, Kyle Walker-Peters, for example, maybe not next year unfortunately, but I do think that's a high moment.
Is that an exclusive?
Well, we'll see.
He always has to ruin the mood, doesn't he? He always has to ruin the mood. Glenn, your highlights, your best moments?
This is not because I've reached the age where I can only remember back 5 minutes, but I thought...
Leeds away.
Yeah, Leeds away. I can remember everything about that game. No, Leeds away because, as I said earlier, the sort of... slightly different approach taken to win that game, and Alfie said that the first Leeds game gave everybody some confidence, and everybody's a hell of a lot more confident about going into the playoffs now, I would imagine. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes. Because we turned up and we put in that performance against Leeds, against a team that still had automatic promotion to play for, and we made them look very average. So it was experimental, and it worked. So I think that to me was kind of the best I've felt after a game, to be honest, because I was kind of, before that, I was like, oh my word, we're going to get in the playoffs, we're going to get mugged by West Brom, which might still happen, of course, but it's I feel a lot more confident about it now as a result of that win against Leeds. So yeah, excellent performance, and even if Leeds had equalised in the last minute, it still would have been a massive step forward in terms of the confidence going into the playoffs. So I'd say that game.
I thought you might have gone with Joe Aribo post AFCON, because you were a changed man as well, weren't you? All of a sudden singing his praises. And...
Well, he was trying, wasn't he? It's interesting how some, you've got to be open enough for players to be able to change your perception. Some can't and some won't. But yeah, Joe Aribo last year, if he'd left in the summer, I don't think anyone would have batted an eyelid, not at all. And then when he started, he got a run of games, played 3 or 4 games before he went to the AFCON, and from our point of view, it was a real shame that he went, because he was really beginning to show that he deserved to stay in the team, and he looks fitter, he looks more determined, he just looks an all-round better player, and he's got a lot of sort of strength about the way he plays, and he is one, and I'll probably get onto this, he is one that if we do go up, I feel like he would have a much better go next season than he did last season. So yeah, fair play to Joe Aribo. And he took a while to get up and running again after he'd come back from the AFCON, because it was basically a month without playing for him. Yeah. He didn't play much at all. Yeah. And I imagine he's one of the first names on the team sheet now. So fair play.
Steve, your highlight of the season?
Difficult to look beyond the double over Leeds. It's always satisfying to beat them, but I think for me the biggest one was West Brom away. Yeah. That Friday night at the Hawthorns would have been very, very Saints, wouldn't it, for us to, having just kind of ended our unbeaten run, to then off the back of that to then kind of throw in the towel again, sort of very quickly afterwards. But change the system, and I mean, let's be brutally honest. When we all saw that lineup on that Friday night at West Brom, everybody would have been saying, "Oh, good God!"
Just check the WhatsApp group.
And yet, fair play, he got it absolutely spot on. He'd spotted something that most of us probably hadn't in the way that the West Brom forwards press, and it gave us a huge advantage because all of a sudden we were able to swarm in midfield and in wide areas and tore them to pieces. And that was a side I think had only lost once at home previously, and we tore them to bits. And that was kind of the night where I thought, okay, this side has still got this.
It's a shame they lost the next two.
Yeah. So yeah, shows what I do.
I want to talk about favourite goals as well. Goal of the season. I suspect Joe Rothwell, Huddersfield. He's probably going to be a winner by a mile. Were there any other, not necessarily just technique, maybe team goals or any that stood out for you, Alfie? Just maybe the timing of them.
Yeah, well, timing especially. Obviously, the Flynn Downs 99th winner against Watford, just because it kept the season alive for 4 more days, which was at that time quite valuable to us. So
was it handball?
Almost certainly, yeah. I think so. I mean, I think their goalkeeper was absolutely fuming about it in the media afterwards, and he said that Flynn went up to him and apologised and said, "Look, mate, you do it as well."
Yeah,
it's totally fair enough, isn't it? But
I mean, let's be honest, we've got no sympathy for Watford, given Cour.
No, exactly.
Punched one in even more blatant a few years previous.
And that goalkeeper is a twat. Daniel Backman.
Flynn Downs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if Gavin Bazunu had actually scored his, it wasn't a championship goal.
For a couple of minutes, we thought that was.
Yeah, but I just felt that Flynn Downs goal was so important. Like you say, it kept it going. If Cardiff was the next game, then that's a massive shame. But for me.
Steve?
I think the 2 Ryan Fraser injury time winners, Hull and Millwall, I think they were consecutive weeks.
Yeah. That was quite a trip, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Hull was an absolute nightmare. I didn't make it in the end because I literally couldn't get on a train at King's Cross.
Oh, I remember that.
So I missed that. I was kind of following it remotely, and it sounded like a pretty even game. But that was that kind of period where our quality players were turning up and delivering in key moments, and that's kind of been a story of a lot of these narrow wins. Has been somebody, kind of doesn't really matter who, whether it's been Fraser, Downs, Adam Armstrong, Shea Adams. They've been the kind of majority ones, I guess, in the attacking sense anyway, who have shown up at the key critical moment to win games by the odd goal. Because I mean, there's a lot of games where we could easily have left points on the table because we've not been able to keep it going till the last rolls of the dice, and I mean we must be comfortably in double figures for points earned in injury time. I mean, obviously the latter sort of period of the season we've given away a few as well, but I think that period around sort of October, November where we were just nicking these games at the death, that was kind of the sort of ultimate validation of the system. That, like, I had people at Millwall, people stood around me at Millwall whinging at us saying, "Get it forward, get it in the box." It's like, well, who are you aiming at? Are we aiming at Adam Armstrong's head against the 2 massive Millwall centre backs? Where's the logic in that? And literally 60 seconds later, we passed the ball from side to side, and then worked a gap and pulled it back for the goal. And all of a sudden, everyone's delighted, and all these people forget. I want them to get it forward. And kind of, it's a bit weird that I kind of find those moments really satisfying when people around me have been shouting their mouth off and they get proved completely wrong about 30 seconds later.
No forward thinking.
Can I give another highlight, actually? I thought about it, and it's a long time ago now, so I didn't think about it. Glenn, you certainly won't remember, but when Sheffield Wednesday away on the first day of the season, they obviously scored the 88th minute goal, and then they just kept the ball for 10 minutes straight, didn't give Sheffield Wednesday a kick. And I thought, oh, brilliant, Russell Martin ball's the easiest
This
thing
is going to be easy,
It turned out that actually Sheffield Wednesday was just
terrible.
really, really bad.
Favourite goal?
Just to prove my memory is not that bad. I got two actually. Carl Walker-Peters at Preston when he cut in on his left foot and curled it in the corner. But my favourite goal is Adam Armstrong at Ipswich with Stuart Armstrong getting the ball. You know, that was the whole. You know, started with the goalkeeper, I think, and it went all the way out to Stu on the left, and he sprinted through and then played the perfectly weighted ball, and Adam Armstrong just had to run onto it and side foot it in the net. And that was an absolutely brilliant goal. Love stuff like that. So they're my two favourite goals, as well as the Joe Rothwell one, because that was just ridiculous, just the way he hit it, and he's a very strange player, but he can certainly hit a ball. It's just very, very strange. But yeah, that was a ridiculously sort of well hit goal and deserved all the accolades that he got.
I was just going to ask Alfie, were you surprised that we didn't perhaps see more of the younger players feature this season?
It's a good question. I think that if you look back at Russell Martin's time at Swansea, he has done this thing where he'll give a young player 3 or 4 games and then you'll never see them again. I think, obviously, George, my colleague at the Echo, is a Swansea fan, and he warned me about that at the start of the season. So I think even when we saw Sam Ammo in the first few games, where I thought he actually did really well, I wasn't surprised to see him drop out. He has given opportunities in the Cups, in fairness. He started Tyler Dibling, started Jayden Montgomery in the Cups. I just think it got to the point of the season where they clearly weren't going to walk the league. I just think he didn't want to take any risks with it. I think there's probably been times where players have come on in the last 20 minutes of the game and they've done absolutely nothing. And you think, well, why not Tyler Dibling or Sam Ammo? They probably would have done more. They would have tried harder. They would have ran more. But I'm not too surprised. I think that Russell knew that it was a tough league to get out of, as it's proven to be, and that's why we haven't seen them. But they've had an unfortunate season in the 21s as well, because they did so well last year in the league, and then they missed out on the final day of the season on goal difference. I think it was to qualify for their playoffs. So they've got no more games left, which is a shame.
Was that one of the most exciting games you've watched, though? Because was it like 6-3 or something, the Manchester United game?
It wasn't that exciting, because watching Man United just tear you apart isn't brilliant. I mean,
but the goals in the last 10 minutes or so, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a lot of drama. Yeah, but again, it was another classic. I think Saints had 65.
Area.
I think Saints had 65% of the ball. They had about 25 shots, and they got beat 6-3. So the philosophy is making its way down perfectly well.
Good stuff. So we've had loads of questions in the last week from Saints fans, from Patreons, from listeners to the podcast. Going to pick a few out and put them to the guys tonight. Drew's with us, I think. Drew is one of our patrons, and you've got a question that I want you to share and see what the guys think.
Hi everyone. Thanks very much for the podcast for the past season, especially. It's been very entertaining. My question, you talked earlier about the squad we had last season. The majority of those went out on loan. Do we see any of the players that have been out on loan returning to the club to do a Bednarak style return and actually be worthwhile, whether we go up or stay in the Championship next season?
I'm going to ask you first, Glenn. It's probably worth reminding everybody we've got Bella-Kotchap, who's out on loan, Alcaraz, Torpal, Seletasar, and then as you go down the list, you've got Roman Perot as well. Lianco, is he going to come back and be a star? And Mateus Liz, the goalkeeper. Is there anybody on that list that you think might potentially be welcomed back into the fold?
Well, in terms of ability, then, and judging by what Russell Martin said about them, assuming he was being genuine, then he'd probably quite like to have Bella-Kotchap back. I've got a slightly different opinion on that. Basically, any player who didn't want to be here in the Championship can do one.
Yeah.
If you think after a season where we got spectacularly relegated bottom of the league, if you think you're too good to drop down to the Championship for a season, then attitude-wise, you're not the sort of player that personally I'd want around the club. But some of those. Roman Perot was a slightly strange one for me. I didn't think he was the worst performer that we had last year. But there was something about him that Russell Martin obviously didn't like. Other than that, I think Torpal would probably have scored some goals in the Championship.
He's been banging them in on loan, hasn't he?
Yeah, but I have a feeling that'll be an interesting test of how the relationship with Göztepe works, because obviously he's done it in the Turkish Premier League, and it'll be interesting to see whether Trabzonspor are trying to get him for nothing basically, and be interested to see how that works if we loan him to Göztepe or charge them a ridiculous amount of money. third party, when you've got two clubs being owned by one group of people, it's a slightly strange one. But long answer to a short question, really, no, I don't see any of them coming back. I mean, the other names are kind of jokes, really, aren't they? I mean, Alcaraz.
I mean, Alcaraz would be an interesting one.
Alcaraz is an interesting one because he hasn't done much.
Do you think Alcaraz might come back, or is that one we might need to sell for fair play?
I mean, if he comes back, he's probably coming back with his tail between his legs, isn't he? A little bit.
Charlie.
Where when you've got this situation where he's been promised the earth at Juventus, and quite clearly he's not up to their level, which at the end of the day for a young player in sort of moving to a new country isn't any disgrace. But I think he was expecting to go into Juventus' first team and earn himself a permanent move. When Juve were never going to pay 40 million euros we had in
42.5.
That's ridiculous. Why do they even bother setting these deals up?
Well, I can tell you why.
Knowing that they're going to knock it down.
Because by doing so, they were able to set his market value naturally. And so when he comes to being sold in summer, they can say, well, look, we value this player at 42.5 million quid. So pay up. So I think that was some of the thinking behind it. They wanted to get the finances back in through the door, wages off the bill. Obviously a bit of a loan fee. I think it was like £3 million loan fee that they needed. And they could say, look, this is a player we think is worth 40 million quid and hope he does well.
Hasn't there also been sort of additional fees to pay because they've not been picking him?
Quite possibly, I'm not sure about that. Do you know what? It's interesting with the Charlie Alcaraz one. It's very rare because in Italy they have to publish the full manuscript of all of the terms and conditions of the deal. So you can actually go onto the Juventus website and have a look at every single condition there, how much it's worth, what they've got to pay, etc. So if you're that interested, I mean, that is a boring evening in.
I'm not averse to these evenings every so often, that's what I said.
I thought he'd been injured for a couple of months.
Yeah, he was. He's a high thigh injury, I think. So
yeah.
So do you think he'd be back, Steve? Or?
I mean, if nobody's going to pay 20 million plus for him, then I would think so. It didn't look as if there was necessarily any sort of falling out or anything like that. It was a case of, well, you're not quite doing what I need you to do in this team. There is this other offer in which, from the club's financial perspective, makes a fair amount of sense. And from the player's perspective, he gets to go and play for Juventus. I mean, everyone's a winner in that scenario, I think, in January, other than, obviously, when we then pull it back to sort of April, when we have a little bit of a attacking midfield creativity problem. All of a sudden, you're missing a player that we paid best part 15 million for, who would be able to play that role. But no, I would say bring him back and he can... I mean, if it's one less position that we need to fill next season.
Yeah. Bearing in mind, Stuart Armstrong is likely to leave.
Yeah. Armstrong's likely played his last game for us, and that's kind of the role that Alcaraz seems to. I don't think we've necessarily seen the best of him. I mean, obviously, he played in a god awful team last season and looked like the most promising out of all of those January signings. But. I think difficult. But yeah, I think you can clearly see that the player's got ability, and it's a case of harnessing that within the team structure and how Russell Martin wants the team to play. And there are certainly defensive parts of his game where, quite frankly, earlier this season he didn't want to know. So if you can harness that and kind of get him sort of bought into it a little bit more, then yeah, absolutely. I think he'd be one of the best players in the league, or should be.
Yeah, should be. Alfie, there's a few questions we've had about structure of the club. For example, Leon, who says, will there be a replacement for Jason Wilcox as Director of Football? We all thought that would be a nailed-on appointment, but that might not be the case.
Yeah, yet to be decided, I think, is the answer from Russell Martin. He said that the ownership may go in a slightly different direction. I think the debate at the moment is whether they bring in a like-for-like replacement for Jason Wilcox, who, bearing in mind, has already come in, already hired the full academy staff, director, recruitment, all the coaches. He obviously hired the manager and gave him sort of free rein. He's brought players in who play this way. And Southampton have a very clear plan of how they're going to play. Russell Martin keeps on insisting they're going to keep with this possession style of football. So I think they're weighing up whether they need a direct replacement or whether they just apportion some of the responsibilities that he was doing to other people. So, they've already got a head of recruitment in Mowbray. Mark Bitcon, who is the sort of football director for all of Sport Republic, I think he's certainly visible at St Mary's quite a lot now, so maybe he's taken on some extra roles. But the crux of it is we don't know what league we're going to be in yet, and the budgets for those two different leagues are massively different. So maybe it's just as simple as, why spend all that money on a compensation fee and a big wage if you think you can do the job without them? And if they do that, you'd like to think they can do it comprehensively. If they get the Premier League budget and the hundreds of millions of pounds to come with, maybe that would be a deciding factor. But at the moment, Russell Martin certainly seemed pretty insistent that might not be the case. They might not bring someone in.
That head of recruitment is an interesting one, Glenn, isn't it? Because we were worried that the wrong person would perhaps be in charge of recruitment during the summer. Looking back to January and the success that was.
Yeah, to be honest, I'd forgotten. Do you know what? I've even forgotten his name. I know it's Mowbray. What's his first name? Come on, who knows?
It's
Darren Mowbray. So, yeah, I mean, it was thought that at the start of the season that Jason Wilcox had been the main man sort of pulling the strings with regards to recruitment. I mean, certainly with Shay Charles arriving from Manchester City, for example, that was seen as a Wilcox deal. Flynn Downs probably came through, from Russell Martin connection at Swansea. So I don't think it was a case of, obviously Wilcox was in charge, but I think there was other people having their input into who arrived. My initial sort of like worry about Wilcox leaving was, that sort of connection that he had to, younger players throughout the country, and that is obviously a market that we've gone for in recent times. But with Darren Mowbray being there, obviously he'll have his ideas. Russell Martin will have input, and I mean, I think we did this. We did this a few years ago when we were being relatively successful with the hit rate on transfers that we were making. We sort of had 4 people sort of like all inputting into it. So yeah, there's more than one way to do it, obviously, and at least there is someone there, and that's another reason why I hope that Russell Martin's there next year, because to provide some continuity. So we know the sort of players that. The sort of skill sets that the players we target are going to have. So yeah, I'm not too worried about the fact that Jason Wilcox is gone. And as Alfie says, I think it will massively depend on the budget that we've got. Obviously, what market are we shopping in? How many of the players we've talked about the players we've got out on loan, the players we've got in on loan. Are we going to be able to bring those in? I mean, obviously you want to. There's a couple of them you obviously want to bring in. Flynn Downs and Howell Bellis. There's probably a couple of others that you're kind of okay. If we sign Brooks and Fraser, that's okay, but it's not going to be the end of the world if we don't. And then there's Joe Rothwell. But so yeah. So I mean, I'm not too stressed.
You're quite relaxed about it.
I'm not quite relaxed about it. And how much money did we get for Jason Wilcox from United?
I don't think there was a specific figure, but the first thing they offered was a year of his salary, and they wanted a lot more than that apparently. But I don't know what that means.
Well, he's got his work cut out with his new job, hasn't he? But that's for another day. That kind of brings us on to a question from James, who says, if we do go up, how many of the current team do you think will handle the Premier League? I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it, Steve? We've had a conversation. I can't remember if it was on a pod or maybe before we started, but we were talking about maybe having to sign 22 players, doing a forest,
do a forest, and end up in all kinds of bother. I mean, ultimately, with a lot of them, you don't know until you throw them into the lion's den. I mean, there's obviously a fair few of them that came down with us, who we've got a pretty reasonable idea of whether they can hack it or not. Some fared better than others, but at the same time, we're in a different system now. We're not playing the same style that Ralph Hasenhüttl played. We're, thank goodness, not playing the same style that Nathan Jones played.
Style was that?
Well, quite.
Nathan Jones,
and it's just, you kind of wonder where it's very difficult to judge players in an environment that they've not actually been in. So I think there are players that will kind of get a second go at it. So players like Bednarek, Stevens to a possibly lesser extent, because obviously he was out on loan last season. Adam Armstrong. I mean, that one's a fascinating one because how Ross Stewart adapts, and assuming he stays fit and is able to start next season at full pace. If we've gone up, then I mean that's a complete unknown. I mean, he's got a record in the Championship, and we signed him off the back of that. We've got no idea whether he's going to be able to make the step up. I think with certain others, Adam Armstrong's had a couple of years at it and hasn't quite worked. So I think we kind of know his limitations. But someone like Stewart, given how important having a goal scorer is in the Premier League, you look at the teams who have got all the sort of middly teams who have got fairly similar budgets. The ones that generally tend to not be in any sort of relegation concern are the ones who have got someone who can score at least 10 goals a season.
Yeah, so Bournemouth with Solanke.
Solanke, for example, who, I mean, Solanke is actually a good example of a player who's been really well coached and has grown his game over a long period of time. Because when Bournemouth signed him, he was absolutely hopeless. And they paid 25 million quid for him. And you write him off as a complete dud. Comes down to the Championship, obviously tears it up. Goes back up, is a little bit ropey. But then you've got a new manager who comes in and kind of changes the way that he maybe approaches the game. And maybe it's the case that Russell Martin can do kind of what Gary O'Neill did at Bournemouth last year in terms of you just give these players a little bit more belief, and you set up a structure whereby they can actually succeed in the league. So we're not going to, I think, from a system perspective, we'd have to take another step like we did at the back end of September, where we went from this, right, we are going to pass, and it doesn't really matter if we lose the ball, even if it's 8 yards out, to being slightly more pragmatic and playing probably 5-10 yards longer, and those passes are a little bit further away from our goal, so therefore the risk is slightly less. And I think if we go up, then next season that's going to have to be taken another step. There'll be another step towards kind of making us more resolute defensively, because I mean, best will in the world, we've conceded 60 goals this season. Yeah. If we go up with basically the same 11 and the same system, we're going to get battered every week. And it's not going to be fun for anybody, and we'll all be basically in the same cycle as we were a year ago. So, yeah, I think it's you've got to assess the players who've got you've got footballing ability. Have they got the mental capacity to be able to deal with doing everything that they do in the Championship about 5 times quicker? Yeah. Can they react in those little moments? And basically, it's those players who will survive if we go up, and that will determine whether we've got to do a Forest or whether we can be a little bit more circumspect.
Is there a good core of the squad there?
Just one final thing on that. I think you have to remember that we're not competing with Man City and Liverpool. So we're not looking at Will Smallbone, for example, and say, can he play against Manchester City? Can he play against Liverpool? We're looking at the teams who are 10th downwards, and can our players and if you think of it in that respect, there's more than the 2 or 3. If you just think about the top boys in the Premier League. So yeah,
there's lots of ifs and buts, isn't there, Alfie? What are your thoughts?
Were you about to ask me if I think there's a good core squad? Yeah. I mean, I think probably all 20 of them, bar maybe a couple that look like they're probably going to leave, you could keep in the Premier League, and they'd either be starters or be options. But I think if you're going to look at the squad brutally right now, because of what's happened to Gavin Zuna, you need a goalkeeper. They've given Joe Lumley another year deal, and then they decided that he's not good enough to play in the last few games of the season, which is, I mean, I'm not saying I don't agree, but it's a puzzling one. So they need a new goalkeeper. They probably need a new left back in the Premier League. Not to say Ryan Manning can't be a good option, but they need an alternative and a competition. They probably need a centre back for depth. They've only got 3. You can keep all 3 of them, but you need another one. Probably need a right back, because as I've said, Carl Peters maybe on the way out, whether they go up or not. So you probably need a right back. Keep Lindown's brilliant. You'll need an attacking midfielder, because Stuart Armstrong is probably gone. You say Charlie, but I think you probably still need another one. And then you need, if Chadham's is leaving, you need a striker to compete with Ross Stewart, and you need a left winger as well. So I mean, already that's a big shopping list. So you probably can't take too many luxuries, and they're going to have to raise a lot of money from sales. I think whether they go up or whether they stay down, people like Onuachu, Ahmed Bella-Kotchap, even Perot, Colettecar, things like that, they're going to be quite important sales. Maybe Kamaldeen Suleimani as well, just to raise that money to do a bit of a rebuild, because it will be needed either way.
All of a sudden, Steve, that money that we could potentially raise is more important than ever, isn't it?
Yeah, especially if we stay down, obviously you're then into year 2 of parachute payment. And the third year it drops off massively, and then that's your lot. So that kind of shows the importance of getting back up. The level of sort of sustained losses. Obviously, we're kind of on the assumption at the moment that Sports Republic are happy to keep kind of funding everything, which to date they've backed those statements up with actual putting cash into the business. So absolutely fine, no questions on that at the moment. The problem comes when, if we don't go up, then all of a sudden you're then in another sale period, and you're then the level of player that you can attract suddenly drops kind of that fraction more. Even if we do bring in, the best will in the world, we're not bringing in another 100 plus million like we did last summer. So, okay, you're now working with a smaller budget anyway, but you've now brought in much less to kind of offset anything that you do want to spend. So then you're now looking at these FFP or PSR, whichever acronym you want to use, these regulations as to, okay, how do we actually fit within this? And it becomes an accounting challenge more than anything. And it's very difficult. Teams are struggling. I mean, we see that. I mean, unless you basically do a Leicester and just throw lawyers at it for a year and just hope that you do enough to go back up, and then you kick the can down the road for another year. Yeah. But I don't think we're in a position where we can do that. So it's going to be very difficult, I think, if we don't go up.
Plenty of other questions. We've had plenty of other mentions as well. Saints in Exile, who's one of our patrons, sent his apologies. He says, "I'm sorry I can't make it tonight. I'm in New York," which I think is nonsense, because there's someone from Florida here that I was chatting to earlier on at the back of the room. So we'll accept that. Anthony says, "Thanks for all your work throughout the season, and a very emotional season. I would have taken a playoff position, but as Martin says, it's the hope that kills you. We seem to be a team that bottles it." Glenn, this is something that we've spoken about as well, isn't it? For want of a better phrase, I think it's a fine phrase, to be honest. It's the big games. Anthony says, "Do you agree?" My thoughts are, we've got a chance to change that now.
Yeah, we do. But yeah, I agree. We over the last, it's you hear it about Spurs all the time, about them being Spursy. Yeah, we're kind of that a little bit, and it's not just, obviously, promotion to the Premier League is a massive thing to bottle, and other teams have bottled it in the past. But we always seem to have struggled, even when we were in the Premier League. Like if we had a chance to move even into the top half, something relatively small like that, we always turn up and stunk the place out, and we were horrible. And it's like, no, we're destined to finish 16th again. And even last season, when we were getting spectacularly relegated, there were periods where, one win and we could actually have gone out of the bottom 3 for a week, but we turned up, stunk the place out, and it just seemed to be a mentality thing across the club. I think Steve was saying earlier, it's a different set of players now, but there's still that sort of creeping fear that mentality is still there a little bit somewhere within the bones of the football club, and they've got to shake that off in these the two-legged West Brom game, and get past that. Hopefully, the final. It's not a time to bottle it. Obviously, you've got to believe that you're going to win and go out there and actually put it all out there on the pitch. And it will be as you say, a chance to not bottle it. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
I mean, Glenn makes a valid point, doesn't he, Steve? This is not a new problem.
No, even going as far back as I can remember, like '92 ZDS Cup final. I mean, we've pulled the game back from 2-0 down and get into extra time, and then we've fallen over again, and we've lost 3-2 to Nottingham Forest in the cup final.
Man United League Cup final.
Man United League Cup final 2017. That was very very similar.
Yep.
I mean, we were obviously stiffed by the officials in the first half of that one as well, but it is a mentality thing where it just feels like clubs just below the elite have this innate ability, like when they get into these big moments, to just find a way of shooting themselves in the foot, and it's amazing how, like, the big clubs, like even the ones that are absolutely god awful at the moment, like Man United. I mean, Monday night was obviously an exception where they finally got what was coming to them, but so many games over the last, I mean, basically since Fergie retired, so many games where they've been awful in big games, but they've found a way of getting through even without like the top, having the absolute top players. There's just something of a mentality of being at those big clubs, and I do wonder whether there is something about being at a middle-sized club whereby the mentality you have is obviously excellent because you've got to that level in the first place, but it's not quite elite, and that's why and also the fan base isn't used to winning things. We all get into this sort of scenario where when we're faced with, say, a cup final, we're all sort of beset with angst. It's like, oh my God, how's it going to go? I just hope we kind of justify ourselves on the day and do ourselves justice, and it must be the same for the players. They get the feeling. I mean, they're not stupid. They don't kind of live under rocks. They know how the general public is feeling, and that must translate through to the players. And you just hope that kind of we go to the Hawthorns on Sunday, and actually it's right. This is what we're going to do. Everybody's well up for it. The 2,000 odd that are there are kind of up for it, and it's going to be right. We're just gonna smash this, and hopefully they get it done. I mean, it will be a sea change from what we've seen before, but we know these players are capable. Whereas in the past, there's always been a little bit of a not quite sure.
No time like the present. We'll get some final thoughts ahead of the weekend in just a moment. Alfie, final question. I think we've had loads of questions, by the way, so thank you. And I'm so sorry if we didn't get to yours. Tove on YouTube was asking about Alex McCarthy. He says, I honestly think he might be at his best because he's at that crossroads in his career, and he must be hungry because his future is uncertain. We were a little bit concerned, weren't we, when Gavin Bazunu was injured. We felt sure that Lumley was going to come in. I know you mentioned it earlier, but obviously Alex McCarthy starting. He's got a chance to actually be a star. It's kind of like a clean slate going into these games.
Yeah, in many ways similar to Che Adams and that sort of thing. He's playing for a contract now, isn't he, Alex McCarthy? Not necessarily here, but somewhere, at some kind of club. I mean, I still think that losing Gavin Bazunu was a big loss. I do think that. I think that Alex McCarthy is equally as good a shot stopper as him, or equally not as
Damning with
good.
faint praise.
Yeah, it's, I mean, if you look at obviously the record in the last couple of seasons in terms of shot stopping, it's not been good enough. So I don't think they lose him in there, but I do genuinely think, and me and Steve were actually talking about this in the intermission, you could see that the way that Leicester, we were talking about, that they knew that Alex McCarthy wasn't comfortable with his feet. They knew that Steve said he wants to take 2 touches to distribute it rather than just one, with Gavin Bazunu can ping it around. So I think they do lose something with that, with Gavin Bazunu going out. And also it's a massive blow for him. You know, he's 22 years old and he's not going to play football again for 9 or 10 months. I'm quite close with one of the academy youngsters called Danel Semedo, who's obviously joined from Chelsea a couple of years ago, and he did the exact same injury at the start of the season in September, and he hasn't played a game since. So it's a long journey back for Gavin, and you do feel for him. But I think Alex McCarthy has a chance to be a hero. Yeah, I still don't get why that decision was made. I asked Russell Martin about it, and he said that he didn't even have time to explain to Joe Lumley why he'd made it. He just said, right, Macca, you're in. And Joe was left a bit puzzled, which I'd have been raging. I'd have been absolutely fuming. And I'm sure he was. So yeah, hopefully he can hack it with his feet in the last couple of games. But I think he's a decent shot stopper. He's got a lot of experience, played hundreds of games at the top level. Why not?
He's played for England as well, Glen, right?
Yeah.
So, and he was our player of the season, a few years ago.
Well,
so he's got it in him.
The season that Gabbiadini scored the goal at Swansea, I think he was player of the year that season.
Yeah, he only played the second half.
Yeah, and he's probably not at the level he was since 2017. I mean, the question mark I've always had against McCarthy is that he seems to be, if you look at his career as a whole, he's spent a hell of a lot of time as second choice. And he seems to, I mean, you don't know if a player's happy with that scenario. You would hope he's not, but he's stuck around at Saints for a long, long time because he's, rumoured that his contract was very favourable, sort of thing. So I always question sort of like players who stick around for a long time at one club when they're not playing. But he's definitely got the capability to be a very good goalkeeper still. But I don't know how old he is now, about 33. Whether, he hasn't played much since he was 30. So is he going to be able to get back to the level he was at when he was 28, 29? He's only got 3 games to do it in. But yeah, I thought he looked decent in the Leeds game. There's no sort of when the ball's sort of played into the box. Yeah. There's no sort of fear with him that he's going to drop a clanger. I've accused him of being a hologram at times because there's been some games.
That's one up from a lettuce.
Well, yeah, I get in trouble for lettuce, but the hologram. There was one game, was it Nottingham Forest at the tail end of last season, where it's just like every goal went straight through him. And at Leicester, he was a bit like that. But then when you actually look at that Leicester game, we lost 5-0. You didn't have a chance with any of those goals. So, I think I thought it was a strange decision to bring him in, bearing in mind Lumley had obviously been second choice. But we actually know more about McCarthy than we know about Lumley as fans. And I think he's good for these 3 games, and we'll see. I'm saying it like we're definitely going to have 3 games. I'm assuming we're going to have 3 games.
You're amongst friends. It's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That won't be the first time. But no, I'm happy with him in goal now.
Okay. I just want to get some final thoughts ahead of the weekend. Steve, you'll be at both games, will you?
Yes.
Another sold out away end. St Mary's selling out today as well. Still feeling confident going into the playoffs?
Yes. We've got a good record against, certainly Leeds and West Brom, beating both of them home and away. Norwich, those games were just weird. The home game was obviously that absolutely mental 4-4 draw where everyone was kind of getting to grips with the new system. The away game, we went up there and we absolutely battered them for an hour and somehow let them back into the game when their manager basically effectively surrendered the game for most of it. Bizarre going away to Norwich, a team we've generally been kind of on a level with. And to see them basically playing for 0-0 at home against us was absolutely extraordinary. David Wagner will obviously turn around and say, well, ends justify the means, we got a point out of it. But I don't think there's anything to fear from that Norwich team. No. Their strength is in centre and midfield. If we can get control of the midfield as we know we can do, certainly as we did against Leeds, then I would imagine that's they're a side that I wouldn't fear us in a one-off game. Leeds, if it was them, if we get through, as I say, we've beaten them home and away, and
not much more we can do.
Relatively comfortably. Obviously it's different in a final, but I think. West Brom is probably actually the hardest of the 3, I think, because their manager does actually know how to tweak a system and to make changes to suit certain things. Ultimately, we kind of, Russell Mine basically did him on that Friday night because he came up with a system that nobody saw coming. Whereas now he's obviously seen it. Yeah. So I don't think I'd be amazed if Jack Stevens is playing as a left back stroke central midfielder again. I think go to the Hawthorns. Get any sort of positive result. Back to St Mary's, and it's then all on us. Yeah. Destiny in your own hands, exactly how you'd want it.
Yeah. Alfie, you weren't with us at the weekend when we previewed the game. What are your thoughts going into this? Are you quite excited?
I'm really excited. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm not a Southampton fan by trade, as some people will know, so this is my first experience of playoffs, really. I think Bristol City were in them maybe in 2008, but I wasn't really that into football back then. But I've been speaking to a couple of the guys, obviously, who played in the 2017 this week, so I've been speaking to Raziak, Andrew Sermon, Klaus Lindevarm, and they all told me the same thing, that they had a team that was capable of playing attacking football, quick football. They're probably the better team, but they got booted around by a Billy Davies Derby side, and they felt the force of it. So I think it's about managing the game for sure. I'm not sure what to expect on Sunday, because I'd be quite happy to come out of the Hawthorns with a draw. To be honest with you. I think you keep it 1-1, take it back to St Mary's. It's going to be a baking hot day on Sunday. I think it's going to be cagey as anything. Like you said, we know about the bottle that we've spoken about, and I think they're going to be so keen to try and avoid being a goal or two down that it's going to counteract that in a certain way. So I don't think it's going to be fireworks on Sunday, but I think keep it tight, get a goal. If you concede one, not the end of the world, take it back to St Mary's, and I'll be confident West Brom over 2 legs. And then, like you said, a playoff final is anybody's guess. It's a massive occasion, they've got to handle it. So I wouldn't say that I'm hugely confident, but I am really excited.
Can I get your score prediction, because we didn't get that at the weekend?
Oh, Alex, keep asking. I'm not giving him one. I think for this weekend I'll go 1-1.
There you go. So you can rule out 1-1, because that's kind of how our prediction is.
I bet on these two. What have they gone for?
Just for a bit of context.
Yeah.
If you took the time to vote in our Player of the Week poll, which we've been doing each Sunday night, you may like to know who won. Our Player of the Season actually was a tie between Stuart Armstrong and Adam Armstrong. So equal votes. Flynn Downs was 3rd. Carl Walker-Peters was 4th. Honourable mentions in dispatches to Mason Holgate, who picked up one of the
Was it also rang?
what game was that? Can you remember?
West Brom.
West Brom at home.
Was it West Brom? Yeah. He was tied with the away fans at Leicester, just for some context there. So congratulations to Stu and Adam Armstrong. Do we send them a mug and a coaster, maybe a t-shirt? Yeah, I think that's the idea. So listen, that's pretty much it for our special live episodes. Don't forget you can follow Total Saints Podcast on all the social media platforms. Drop us a DM if you're interested in buying a t-shirt or a hoodie expertly modelled by our panel tonight. Then it's shop.totalsaints.co.uk. Thank you to Alfie, thanks Steve, thanks to Glen, thank you to everybody as well who made it out this evening to join us. A huge shout out as well to the team at Steam Town Brewery for hosting us so well this evening. It's been a great night. We'll be back with our next live stream on Monday, which is the 13th of May at 7:15 to pick over that first leg against West Brom. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for coming tonight, and good luck for Sunday.